Audie, the 2023 Fighters Only Red Carpet. I know you've been to these before, correct? So how's it feel to be back, though?
It's great. It's great to see the sport continuing to grow and the industry honoring the sport, coming together from fighters to managers to coaches to sponsors. It's just really good to see that 15 years later it's still going strong and long may it continue.
Yeah. And I know for the managers and the coaches, I always say, have the toughest travel schedule. The fighters have the one fight and then they go home for a little bit. You guys are constantly on the road. So I guess for you personally, as 2023 winds down, how was this year now that it's coming to a close for you?
I mean, look, we get to do this, so ultimately, at the end of the day, I think if you find yourself complaining, you need to snap out of it and realize you get to do this. So it's an honor and a privilege, and more importantly, you got to enjoy the ride. And the ride comes with wins and losses, and getting your hand raised, so to speak, figuratively, as it relates to at least our positions, if you will. But I love it. I'll take every minute of it. I'll take the entire journey altogether has been an amazing ride, and I'm excited about the future.
Any sort of goals for Paradigm in 2024? I know that's maybe kind of a broad question, but what are you guys looking to accomplish in the new year?
We always have bold ambitions, right? I think everybody should have bold ambitions. We plan for the best, and you go and try to attack and execute it. So it's continuing the same, continuing to raise the bar, advocate for our clients, negotiate the best contracts in the business and all the different promotions, and continue to innovate, right? That's one of the things I think I'm proud that we've been able to do is innovate in combat sports from crossover fights to ventures, and it's exciting for us. So I'm honored to be able to get to continue to do this, and I'm excited about 2024 and beyond.
The MMA landscape changed recently. I'm curious to hear from your perspective the Bellator PFL sale. How does that change things for you, the clientele, the industry, kind of what your options are out there?
Look, I think it's changed in the sense that you see that now institutional capital investors are coming in, and they did once before as well. They didn't necessarily succeed, right, from Affliction and other promotions that came and gone, but ultimately I think that this is great for the sport. I think fighters are going to not only benefit from it in terms of continuing to provide other opportunities, whether it's free agency or whatnot, but I think it's good for the sport, and let's hope that they're going to be successful in what they do, and I think it's good not only for the PFL, Bellator, and those fighters, but it's good for the UFC and those fighters and all the up-and-coming fighters that can dream big and now have options.
Speaking of the UFC, I'm sure I got to ask you about Conor McGregor. Any sort of updates? You think we'll see him back? UFC 300's coming around. I guess any sort of timetable for his return?
If it was up to him, he'd be fighting Saturday. So, ultimately, I think we're trying to make sure we're doing everything right. We're following all the right standard operating procedures to get him back, into the octagon as soon as possible. UFC 300 would be amazing, and obviously we're pushing as hard as we can to hopefully make that happen. But ultimately, it's going to be an exciting 2024 for his return.
Think it's going to be Michael Chandler?
Look, I think that's the likely opponent, right? They just did the Ultimate Fighter together. I think the fans want to see that fight. But there's other opponents as well. So, it's, at the end of the day, I think the UFC is still keen on Michael Chandler, and unless something changed there, I certainly think that that's who he's going to be.
There's obviously a lot of questions about when, but also, what have you seen from him in the last couple of years in terms of, actually, where is he now? Like mentally, physically, do you feel like he's in a pretty good spot to make that return?
He's in a really good spot. He's hungry. He's anxious to get back in there. I mean, Conor's a once-in-a-generation type of athlete, and he's transcended the sport, and now is a mogul, right? A business mogul. So he loves to do this. He doesn't have to do this, but if you hear him in any of his interviews, he's like, "You've kept me from my living," and it's like, it's what he loves to do. That if you gave him all options, said, "Okay, fighting or give everything else up," it's not a realistic scenario, but ultimately that's how much he loves fighting. I think he'd do it.
Because Audie, because it didn't sound like it was certain that it could be Michael Chandler. Is there a possibility that Conor McGregor would come back this year for a fight against, and I'll just throw the name out there, for the trilogy with Nate Diaz? Is that potentially a possibility?
Look, Conor definitely wants that trilogy to happen, and it's going to happen. There's the Poirier rematch as well, right? There's a bunch of names out there that exist that are possibilities. And I just don't know if Nate gets a deal done, right? He's still a free agent. I think he's probably still weighing his options. He has great offers on the table from other promotions as well, from what I hear, just like you guys hear. But ultimately, I think if he gets a deal done and he's in the mix, you can't say that it's not a possibility, right? I think a lot of things have to happen before that even becomes a real conversation.
Dana has always said that it's still his house and he's welcome back. It would suggest that it is a possibility. From your perspective, is that the biggest fight that Conor could get? Is that trilogy?
It's hard. That trilogy is definitely one of the biggest. Poirier rematch. I mean, the way that last fight ended, it's not a fight. It's an injury, right? You got stopped because of the injury. So ultimately, that has to be run back. And Chandler's also a big fight because now you have that build-up with Tough. So I think that there's many fights. Even outside of those three fighters, there's a lot of other great matchups for Conor to match up against. And the fans will love either way. But I can't wait for that trilogy with Nate to happen. Nate's a legend in the sport. Continues to shine bright. And I think that those two together, it makes for some exciting content and competition for the fans to enjoy.
And right now, what we're talking about kind of are those money fights. But from speaking with Conor, what is his motivation, if it exists, to become UFC champion again?
He still has that desire. There's no question. I mean, at the end of the day, I think all these fighters. That's the thing about the sport of mixed martial arts. It's a real thing. It's not the scripted thing where they're just trying to make noise. Despite all the banter that we may see, they're all striving to be the best in the sport, to be the best in the division, right? To leave their mark on the sport. And he's already done that. He doesn't need to ever fight again to have a legacy, if you will. He's set that legacy already from a fighting perspective. I think he just loves to compete. And that is admirable, right? To still have that ambition and that fire in your belly despite all the success.
And I have one last question. I don't think we ever heard from you in terms of the fallout with USADA and Conor being at the center of that. Just from your perspective, what was that all about as you saw that, as you were part of it and seeing it unfold?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's unfortunate. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but we did everything right. I felt like they tried to throw us in the middle of their issues, and that's all I'll say about that.
Thank you, Audie.
Yeah, I've got one for you. I'm just curious, what do you think is the biggest misconception that fans have about your job? Because fans can be brutal.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what is the most common thing that people are coming at you and you're just like, what the heck?
I've heard it all, right? And so I can't tell you one thing, but I certainly don't think they understand what it takes, right? And I certainly think there's even people in the industry that don't understand what it takes. It's much more than, client relations, if you will, right? It's client servicing, but it's everything from just not only the recruiting aspect, but then the servicing aspect, which includes career management, contract negotiations, includes brand building, includes procuring other opportunities, whether it's sponsors, and helping them build not only a successful career in the sport, but helping them transition into that post-athletic identity, which is important, not only hopefully with the financial means, right, that they can set themselves up with, but other opportunities that they're going to get based on their success and notoriety within the sport.
I got one last one for you. Michael Page, any sort of update on him? We saw him on the UFC Matchmakers board. We saw him in the PFL cage. So I guess, what can you give us about him? Do you think we'll get a deal done with somebody soon?
Look, he's the hottest free agent in the sport this year. And, ultimately, he wanted to make sure that he tested free agency. He had his eyes set on the UFC. PFL is making a strong push at him. But I think we'll have some news on that soon.
Thanks, Audie.
Thank you.